And for the first item of business would be to take up and approve the minutes of our last meeting. Do we have a quorum? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Yes. Do we have a motion?
Do we need to introduce ourselves first?
Why not? My name's Mark McDonald. I'm the chair of LCAR, and we will introduce ourselves. I serve on finance and natural resources.
So going alphabetically, I'm Joe Benning from Caledonia County. I chair institutions and I serve on judiciary.
Going alphabetically, I'm next. So Seth Bongartz, I represent Bennington 4, Arlington, Manchester, Sandgate, and Sunderland, and I serve on the Natural Resources Committee.
Good morning, Ginny Lyons. I chair Senate Health and Welfare and serve on the Education Committee.
Morning, I'm Carol Odie. I serve on the House Ways and Means Committee.
Good morning, Representative Trevor Squirrel, Vice Chair of LCAR, and I serve on House Appropriations.
Senator Bray.
Good morning. My name is Chris Bray. I represent Addison County, Huntington and Beals Gore, and live in Bristol. I serve natural resources and energy and finance.
So thank you all, and we may have more signing in. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, everybody's here.
With that, Mr. Chair, I'll move approval of the minutes.
Okay, go. Senator Benning has moved that our minutes of the last meeting be approved. Is there a motion? There is. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Those
Aye.
opposed say nay. And the minutes have been approved, which brings us to the first item on the agenda, which was one that we did not finish at our last meeting. 21P02, Agency of Education Rules Governing the Licensing of Educators and the Preparation of Educational Professionals. We had testimony from 2 witnesses in the last 3 minutes of our last meeting, Mr. Remmers and Patrick Halliday. We would give you an opportunity to refresh us on the rules. This is the biggest packet of rules that we have had this year, I believe. And what we have before us appears to be much narrower. So the floor is yours to bring us back up to date on where we were a week ago.
Thank you very much. My name is Patrick Halliday. I'm the chair of the. I'm not the chair of anything. I'm the director of the Ed Quality Division, and I'm joined by Eric Remmers, who's the chair of the Vermont Standards Board for Professional Educators. Eric, I don't know if you wanted to say anything, and I can then go and kind of give a real brief summary of the changes.
You are you're really good at doing the summary, so have at it.
Great. So there are kind of just a handful of changes. I know that the packet might be big, but the changes in the rules are pretty limited. The majority of the changes that we have were really just cleaning up, putting commas in the right places and those sorts of things. From kind of years of tinkering. So a lot of that is just some clarification of terms and grammar, quite honestly. There are 4, I think, other issues that just we wanted to bring attention to. One of them, historically, we've had 2 different endorsements for one, what we call the reading language arts specialist, and another is a reading language arts coordinator. We have the proposed rules have those combined into a single endorsement now called a specialized literacy professional, and that is with consultation from folks who hold this endorsement, as well as for those who are preparing for this endorsement in the education preparation programs in the state. the two the two old, if you will, endorsements will continue to be held by those who currently have them, but we would not be offering them to anyone in the future. A second one, we face a regular challenge with finding folks to teach driver and traffic safety education. So we are proposing a route, so through our career tech education centers that would have the ability to teach driver's education in those. The third one is historically education speech language pathologists and school psychologists were not considered by definition teachers, which led to some issues, a couple of potential issues, one around access to retirement, a second around access to the contract, and a third around the ability to move into administrative positions based on our rules. And again, with the recommendation from those who hold those endorsements, they are in favor of that being counted as teaching experience now, which would again, and most notably allow folks with those endorsements to move into administrative positions if they're interested in doing that. The fifth one's a little bit tricky, and it's a little bit of a clumsy wording, but we have historically had a rule that hindered folks who once might have had a Vermont license, have let that license expire, move to another state and would like to come back to Vermont, from getting, it is a little unwieldy in getting that license reinstated or getting that license allowed. And so we have a way we kind of change some rules or proposed rules around the use of initial. In practical, this is someone who might have had an elementary license, using this as an example, gone to Pennsylvania, let that license lapse, decided that they wanted to teach secondary social studies, have a secondary social studies license in Pennsylvania, would like to come back to Vermont and teach social studies. In the past, or as the rules currently read, they would first have to reinstate that elementary license and then add that social studies license. And that's a hindrance that would only be because someone had once taught in Vermont, whereas if they had never taught in Vermont, they could have just come in with that social studies license. And so creating a pathway for those incidents, they're not common, but we probably get 4 or 5 of those a year. And in the past year, we've probably seen a little bit more of those with more people coming into the state during the pandemic. I think those are the most of changes that are material.
Do you have any questions for the witness? If not, in looking at the packet, there are 220 pages of rules for teachers and other licensed professionals in our public schools. I noticed in the advisory board, the independent schools are included in along with the principals associations and school boards associations and advisors putting the rules together. In which schools must teachers be licensed?
A teacher needs to be licensed in any public school in Vermont.
And if there's a independent or private school, what are the rules that apply in those institutions?
I'm not an expert on the independent schools, but in general, it depends on the nature of the independent schools. For most of them, there's not a requirement for licensure, except for special education schools. There is a requirement for licensure in those situations. Some schools make a specific choice to have all of their teachers licensed, but it is in general up to the individual school, independent school, what that requirement would be.
So if you wish to apply to teach in a independent or private school, you need not meet these 220 pages of requirements?
Generally, that's correct, yes.
And there's no discrimination against those schools where they get public tax dollars to teach students with teachers that have not met the public school requirements?
Again, I'm not an expert on independent schools, but the requirement for licensure is generally not, outside of special education, is generally not required for in order to be hired at an independent school. And actually, those are a set of rules that are not controlled by the Standards Board. Those are controlled by the State Board of Education.
Well, there's no one member of LCAR that's from an education committee. Maybe we will chat with our colleagues and ask them how this came to pass and how it continues. So, or maybe not. Are there any other questions for our witnesses? Senator Lyons.
Okay, thank you. I can't find the reference. I had looked at it earlier on the requirements for student teachers, those learning to be teachers, and the requirement that they have a B average in order to be student teachers. And how is that working out in terms of some of those students who may have some strong attributes for education, but don't have the B average because they took a physics course? I don't know how is that sorted out?
Yeah, I'm looking at, so this is not a proposed rule change, but in the current rules, I'm looking at it right now. It's under Rule 5924, page 50 of the old rules we're looking at. And it's an overall, let's see, I just want to make sure I'm getting this exactly right.
3.0 out of 4 or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
4-point scale.
Anyway, just
Yeah.
a question, because in other places that if you're going to change your certification to something, only courses that are B count for that shift. And so it's a little different, but I don't know whether who decides that part of it.
So it's an overall 3.0 average, and then there are particular classes, particularly the student teaching experience itself, that has to also have at least a 3.0. I know, so a couple different things. I know at times it is a challenge for students to complete their programs because of a bad freshman year or something like that, that they just got off to a poor start. Schools will allow, or certain, it's really up to exactly how this works is up to the individual education preparation programs. They will often allow a student to go through student teaching who has a grade point average less than 3.0, provided that they understand that there are particular goals that need to be met in order to get that recommendation up to a 3.0. We also have, through peer review, an alternative process where someone without a 3.0 would still be able to get licensure as an alternate route, and that takes into account exactly what you're talking about, Senator Lyons, for someone who maybe a non-traditional student, or maybe had a poor start to their academic career, or failed out of the physics classes that they might have taken at the beginning of the year. So there are routes, and we're pretty adept at counseling folks, as are the Ed Prep programs, and counseling folks to those routes for a promising candidate to move forward.
So that's validated through the rules process as well as through the teacher education programs at various institutions?
Right, that's correct. There is always a little bit of, I don't want to say flexibility in the rules, there's flexibility in the implementation at the individual Ed Prep program. Some will say you cannot go into student teaching unless you already have a 3.0 average. That's a decision that's made at the institutional level. Others will say you're really, really close, that if you get in your three remaining classes, if you average a 3.5, we can do the math and realize you'll be at that 3.0 and allow us to recommend and still allow individual educators on a case-by-case basis to enter into their student teaching.
Okay, I mean, this is a larger conversation when you think about people who have varying skills, not just book learning skills. So, but
Right.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and that's a major consideration of how peer review comes to be as well, for folks who choose that route instead.
Any other questions for the witness? I think most of us in the legislature would cringe at the notion that we had to have a C plus average to get elected. So, or if that was the case, that would be the easiest way to reduce the number of legislators in any legislature, I'm sure. Is there any further questions for the witnesses?
Seems pretty.
If not, do we have a motion?
I'll move it.
Representative Bongartz.
Yeah, that was my motion. I meant to vote. I move that we accept the rules. Yeah.
Okay. And could you share with us your grade point average?
I would have made it, but it would have been close.
Thank you. It's been moved that the rule be approved. Is there any further discussion? If not, please unmute yourself. All those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed say nay. And the rule has been approved. Which brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is the schedule for the interim period between now and when we reconvene in January. Charlene has posted a schedule of dates with the traditional time of 10 o'clock until noon as the time for our meeting. Representative Higley, who's not with us today, had urged us to meet as early as possible. So, Mr. Halliday, you're just waving us goodbye. Okay. I spoke with Charlene earlier, and there's nothing that would prohibit us from meeting at any particular time. And we have no indication that we're going to be off Zoom anytime soon, which would mean we could meet as early in the morning as we felt comfortable, and probably should not meet before state employees are expected to be on the job, which would put us around 8 or 8:30. But we could meet at any 2-hour block during the day. So the discussion is really open on what would be the preferences of LCAR members as we decide what time of day to meet moving forward.
Is this a conversation?
This is a conversation.
I like
Mr. Chair.
Anthea has her hand up.
And
Yeah. I'm sorry, Anthea? Didn't
I
see
just
it.
want, for the record, Anthea Dexter Cooper, Office of Legislative Counsel. So one of the last things that you did before you adjourned was you passed JRS 24, which had to do with Joint Rule 22A, and that has to do with meeting virtually. So you are potentially dealing with 30 days after restrictions being lifted, not being able to meet via Zoom anymore. So if that's going to affect timing of when people need to get to the State House, just something to consider, that you probably will be off Zoom sooner than you're back in the building.
Thank you. Was not familiar with that provision, but fully expected that we would face that question in the fairly near future.
Yeah. So I think
Senator
originally you were dealing with August, but if they're lifted sooner, it could be, I think, as early as the beginning of July.
So as we continue this conversation, it may be a two-part decision, and one to how do we meet as long as we're on Zoom? And then when we're off Zoom, what might we adjust to? Senator Bray.
So I think I have a question for council, and that is when we're allowed to begin to meet in person, does it require us to meet in person?
So some of these questions are probably going to be better suited for the Senate Secretary and the House Clerk. There was discussion about the implementation of this, saying legislators did not need to appear in person, but they wouldn't be able to vote, similar to what you were doing pre-COVID, where someone could call in if they weren't available for a meeting, but they wouldn't be able to vote in sort of your standing committee roles. But this says that it is only Joint Rule 22A that even gives joint committees the ability to meet remotely. And that's something that the Joint Rules Committee needs to grant. And then the new language says the authority of the Joint Rules Committee under this Rule 22A shall only be in effect through the 30 days following the date on which the governor rescinds all remaining capacity restrictions at gatherings and events and mask and physical distancing requirements issued under the governor's declaration of a state of emergency in response to COVID-19 as determined by the Joint Rules Committee. And then there's some additional language about, what would happen if things changed and there needed to be a reason to go back to meeting virtually. So my reading of this is the meeting needs to be non-virtual, but there would be options for you to join the meeting virtually. It might make it so that you couldn't participate to the full extent that you would be able to in person. And then you might run up against quorum issues, especially in terms of some of the actions that LCAR takes. It's not a majority of those present, but it's a majority of LCAR for purposes of objecting, and then the certification of the objection if you're going that route to prevent a rule from being fully adopted.
Okay, so thank you. So we would basically go back to pre-pandemic rules, which required being present in order to vote.
Yes.
Okay. I ask because although I think we're all aware of the downsides of the Zoomiverse, when it comes to a sort of a narrow meeting like LCAR, it's very practical to beam into a meeting and then continue with life. If you have another job, for instance, it's much more easier to weave into the rest of life. Okay, so thank you. Just wanted to ask.
Thank you, Senator Bray, and Thea, thank you. So as we continue this discussion, the first we would be asking ourselves, when do we wish to meet between now and when things might change? And in the interim, we'll have an opportunity to hear from the Senate Secretary or the Speaker's office or someone who can continue to enlighten us in the way Anthea has put forward. So, Senator Lyons.
So I was going to propose that when we're meeting by Zoom, that we meet at 9 o'clock, and that then we return to the 10 o'clock hour when we're meeting in person. But then I would also offer another suggestion, and that as a result of all of our interest in saving greenhouse gases and in our interest in not driving to get to a meeting for a short period of time and then resuming whatever other lives we have.
Don't say resuming.
Resuming, yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I would wonder, Mr. Chair, if you and or Anthea could communicate with the Chair of Rules and with the Senate Secretary to find out if it is appropriate for us to continue with Zoom in the off session. I don't have a problem driving to a meeting, but it does have certain consequences.
Okay. But assuming that we set it hour to meet on Zoom for the time being. So Representative Squirrel and I will consult with leadership and share what seems to be a consensus that members of LCAR would like to be able to Zoom for the 2-hour meetings, and others might seek to go to the State House, and there'd be a combination of those, and see if the Joint Rules Committee would. Anthea, I mean, my understanding is that this is under the control of the Joint Rules Committee or statute.
I do not think, absent Rule 22A, the Joint Rules Committee has the authority to let joint committees meet virtually. So this could be something that is a lessons learned from the pandemic and from how you all, came to actually embrace some of the perks of Zoom. And maybe that is something that could be addressed in an upcoming legislative session to make it easier for you to meet virtually in the future. But I do not think, and again, this is probably something to get confirmation from Secretary Bloomer and Clerk Rascon, that joint rules would have the authority to let you meet via Zoom. My understanding is that there are, I think it's 4 committee rooms in the State House that are being outfitted to sort of have this dual meeting where witnesses could join via Zoom. Everything would still be on YouTube. Those who came to the State House would be in a room that has cameras that would capture you when you're speaking. And that part of the 30 days is to give IT the ability to get that up and running. And that part of the summer was going to sort of be used to kind of test drive how these committee meetings would function as you come out of your virtual world and re-enter legislating in person. But again, for a lot of what you do, you don't, necessarily need to have everyone voting. And it could be that you meet less frequently over the summer in the beginning, if the schedule is lighter, to try and consolidate rules. Charlene's great at estimating how long things are going to take. And maybe you don't have some of your members who are farther away come unless there's a rule that you want to be able to vote on in person, or to be able to vote on because you would need to be in person to vote.
Thank you for further clarifying, which I think you must have clarified the first time you said it, but I heard it the second time.
It's a big change going from everyone being behind a screen to everyone being back in person.
So for now, the decision that we should be making is what time of day will we meet, and at the same time we'll be pursuing what our options are, or whether a veto session or something might be an opportunity that leadership might choose to recommend to us on how to deal with this issue. Leadership in both branches, both houses. Senator Benning.
So I'm going to agree with Ginny that we ought to be meeting at 9 o'clock if we're on Zoom, and 10 o'clock if we come back in person. I probably will renew my thoughts from back in March of 2020 that with Zoom now reality, we need to have permanent rules in place that takes care of us moving forward. The other question that comes to mind, though, Mark, is while we are on Zoom, what exactly is our expense account? Because I'm not sure that I'm aware. I may have missed an email somewhere along the way. I'm assuming we're not being requested to work for nothing. But at the same time, if we're not traveling to and from the State House, that's a difference of some expense, and I'm not sure what the authority is right now.
I believe we got mileage, lunch money on what you actually consumed, and a per diem. That is what has been the practice.
Well, maybe I'm the only one questioning. I'm obviously in my office right now, which is where I normally go. I'm not traveling to and from the State House, and I'm not eating a meal in the process. So what exactly is it that I'm getting? Am I expected then to work for nothing?
No, I don't know the answer. I think Anthea and
Charlene might have an answer.
Yeah, sure.
But we did get an
You-
email.
Yeah, you're not going to get mileage, and I don't think you're going to get food, but you do get a per diem. So you do get, I can't even remember what the per diem is per day. So I will be telling Mike that you guys all who are here is going to be getting a per diem for today.
We'll have, that will be an easier answer for our next meeting. And I think, yeah, Charlene has said what I would have guessed, yeah.
So Charlene, is Michael entering our expenses or do we have to do that personally?
No, Mike is doing that. You know, I will email him and tell everybody who has been here, and he'll put it in for you guys.
Okay. And Mark, the only other comment that I had, I'm still rolling in my head what my grade point average was. Anthea will appreciate this. When you graduate from law school, those who end up getting A's will become the academicians in the legal world. Those who get B's will become the judges. Those who get C's are the ones who make all the money. I don't fit into any of those categories,
George
so I
Bush
don't
had
know
a
what-
C average.
Yeah, when I went to school, C was average. And I struggled to get there. Okay, so we just do a show of hands, unless someone has an alternative starting time from 9 o'clock. Then hearing no objections, it's 9 o'clock. Yep, buddy. And our next meeting, Charlene, is the June,
June 17th,
okay,
starting at 9. And I sent those rules out to you yesterday, so you should get them tomorrow, maybe.
and if we get any word on from leadership and what actions we might take to request having to do with our future meeting conditions, we'll pass them along before June 17th or when they come in. So, is there any further discussion about anything on this refreshing and cool morning? Senator Bray?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, in terms of what, it's the governor declaring that the state of emergency is over, right? That starts the 30-day clock. And I'm just asking if anyone has had any kind of, knows anything about what the governor's saying about that. I know that he's talked about when we get to 80% vaccinated, certain things might happen, but I don't know that that equates to declaring the state of emergency over. Does anyone know when we might expect that?
Yeah.
So I can't say when you might expect that necessarily, but I will say the language of the joint rule is not triggered, or it's not connected to the lifting of the state of emergency, but rather it's the rescinding of remaining capacity restrictions and gatherings and events and mask and physical distancing requirements issued under the governor's declaration of a state of emergency as determined by the Joint Rules Committee. So the Joint Rules Committee is vested with making a determination on whether or not that triggering event has been met. So
Okay.
I think you're going to need the Joint Rules Committee to make some sort of determination based on whatever the governor's response is to hitting that 80% threshold, or if there's something else that needs to happen before those restrictions are lifted.
Okay, thank
So
you.
it's kind of a two-parter. Governor needs to do something, Joint Rules Committee needs to do something.
So it
Got
would, so it would make sense to communicate with the Joint Rules Committee, although our interests may not be consistent with the emergency, but more interest in saving greenhouse gases or not interrupting lives. So I'm not sure we would meet the criteria necessary to continue Zooming.
And the Joint Rules Committee would have to meet.
unless the only room they offer us to meet in is the Senate Agriculture Committee and then room, and then we'll never have the safety requirements.
So we know what we know and we know what we don't know. Okay. Any further discussion?
May I ask a question of Charlene about a separate issue?
Go ahead.
Do we still have, I'm sorry, I haven't looked at the list. Do we still have 20P26, the DFR third-party administrator rule on our list, or has that been,
That, you've already done that.
we've done that? I
Yeah.
don't know why I still have it. Maybe I just wanted to have it for posterity.
Yeah, you've already done that.
Okay, thank you.
The rules that are pending now are the, let me tell you. For the June 17th, there's going to be the emergency rule for the earned good time repeal. And then we just got another one in for the clean water service provider rule. Those went out yesterday to you. So that's for the 17th. And then for July 1st, we have 4 Agency of Human Services rules.
Darlene, if you can make a note of it, I won't be here July 1st.
All right.
Okay. So unless anyone has other business, we can wrap it up now. Senator Bray.
I know my cue. I move that we adjourn.
Senator Bray has moved that we adjourn till June 17th. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed say nay. And thank you all. Enjoy this return to a fresh and cool couple of days.
Bye, everybody.